Well, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Samina Yasmin. If you've looked at your program, you would have known it anyway. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you for this session after a very good lunch. So I'm sure if you're asleep, Anita Weiss is going to wake you up because she has this really engaging way of talking about issues related to Pakistan or any other issue. And again, if you have already read her bio, you can use that time to nap. But if you haven't, let me tell you that she has her doctorate from Berkeley. She worked on Pakistan, and she's worked on basically on issues of development and women culture. She's been very active in her publications in the area, and she said she doesn't really want me to repeat the whole lot, so I won't do that. But her books have basically been significant in drawing attention to how development, politics, and cultural notions really impact on the place of women. She's just returned from Pakistan after a stint of 6 months on a Harry Frank Guggenheim Research Fellowship, conducting interviews for her current book project, Countering Violent Extremism in Pakistan, Local Actions, Local Voices. She's a member of the editorial board of Globalizations, has been a member of the recent advisory board of the Pakistan National Commission on the Status of Women, and has been treasurer and vice president of the American Association of Pakistan Studies. She's on the executive committee of the Religion and International Relations, as well as the IDSS sections of the International Studies Association. She's just stepped down after 7 years of being the department head of international studies at the University of Oregon. So listen to a really wonder woman who has done all that and really written a lot at the same time and can keep you awake even after a very good lunch. Please welcome Professor Anita Weiss.
I will seek to keep you awake, and if I don't, then at least all the clothes and glitter that I'm wearing will keep you awake, right? Anyhow, thank you very much, Samina, for such a kind introduction. I'm honored to be invited to address this group of scholars who are all, in their own ways, deeply dedicated to understanding how the Middle East and South Asia, but especially today, this is the keynote for the South Asia stream, how South Asia might be able to emerge from the turmoil in which it has become embedded. Extremism based on religious identity and religious fervor is by no way a new phenomenon in South Asia, but it has taken on a new meaning in this era of nuclear weapons, extremist rhetoric, environmental degradation, unrelenting poverty, and the global communications revolution. I could probably add 10 more things, but I think these are huge factors that have caused this to take on a new meaning in this era in thinking about prospects for peace. People from all walks of life throughout the subcontinent, all walks of life, the poorest, the wealthiest, they're all now aware of what is occurring in the world, or at least as much as news organizations and social media are able to communicate with them about it, and people care about it. I've talked to people, completely unpod, completely uneducated people in all different parts of Pakistan, and they ask me questions about what's happening in the world, and I have lively conversations with them because they try to, very often they follow things. Because with globalization increasingly infringing on what we do, how we think about what we do, and bringing in new economic, political, and social realities, overwhelming majorities of people are envisioning more prosperous, healthy, and contented lives. But the reality of what could be a celebration is far from joyous. Instead, we see a reversion back to factionalism in many parts of the world, and nowhere does this seem to manifest more than in South Asia. While there is much to unify the countries of South Asia, India, and here especially I'm talking about India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. While there's much to unify these countries historically and culturally, people have long picked up on different interpretations of history and culture to use them to divide communities, both within specific countries and between them. Religion often is at the heart of these divides. While we can trace conflicts based on religious identity back hundreds of years in many parts of South Asia, to make sense of how we might be able to exit from this pervasive quagmire of conflict in the subcontinent, I'm focusing right now on what has been occurring in Pakistan for today's talk. Let me explain why I've decided to focus on Pakistan. There are many conflicts occurring within that country based on religious identity. How can we even think about peace in South Asia? Specifically also, how can there be peace between India and Pakistan until those conflicts are earnestly addressed and resolved, or at least somewhat addressed and resolved? At this time, whenever anyone in Pakistan advocates reaching out to India, they're often charged with being an Indian agent and undermining Pakistan's integrity. But also a big reason for such charges is that there's so much tension within the country between religious and ethnic groups that manifest in violence that Pakistan has largely fallen into an abyss of self-absorption. So blaming the other is often a prudent way for the state to avoid addressing the factionalism within. But until Pakistan addresses and resolves these issues, I'm stymied about how we can move forward and think about prospects for peace in South Asia. Therefore, today, I begin by looking at how the Pakistan state has sought to construct a Muslim identity so as to unify its population. But that unity was mostly in rhetoric only, as deep-seated animosities continued and were sometimes further perpetuated by state policy over the years. Needless to say, this also has had implications for Pakistan's relations with India. In other words, the trope that Pakistan must liberate Kashmir because they are Muslim brothers and sisters. And you've always heard this in Pakistan. Also, the creation of Bangladesh, and most importantly, its own identity. What does it mean today to be a citizen of Pakistan? And who is to be a citizen of Pakistan? And I could ask 10 more questions like that. And the fact that this is something that people are discussing and that separates people is very disconcerting. Later on in this talk, towards the end, I'll bring in how other countries of South Asia are not without their own challenges of how religious extremism has wreaked havoc upon their societies, including the safronization within India, the rise of religious extremism in Bangladesh, how Sri Lanka was shattered a generation ago by an ethno-economic conflict that often manifests as a religious one, and also the many migrations and displaced persons we see in South Asia who are outside of their countries of origin due to religious intolerance. But I will bring those issues in towards the end, as we first need to address what has been happening in Pakistan and how lakhs of its people are avidly reaching out to recapture its syncretic traditions. The questions of religiously motivated extremism and violence and how to maintain harmony between religious groups goes back to the colonial era. Offenses relating to religion, didn't realize what I had to set this in. Offenses relating to religion, making it a crime to deface or destroy places of worship in British India, were first codified by the British in 1860. They were subsequently modified many years later in 1927, following religious riots to ward off, quote, deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings of any class by insulting its religious belief. So this has been going on for more than a century. nearly a century. The British couldn't think of any way of dealing with these riots other than passing laws to prevent them, and emphasizing they were doing so to ensure there would be no discrimination based on religion. Pakistan incorporated the existing penal code, including these laws, when it became an independent state in 1947. Now, there were several events that led to the rise of religious intolerance in Pakistan. Some people attribute this to two significant early actions on the part of the state. The passage of the Objectives Resolution on March 12, 1949, and incorporation of the Second Amendment to the 1973 Constitution. Let me back up a little bit, though. On August 11th, 1947, the day that many of us consider was the day of Pakistan's independence, precisely because of this speech. On August 11th, 1947, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, in his famous presidential address to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan 3 days before the country actually came into being. I can't have a flare, can I? He stated that, and because many of you may be unfamiliar with his speech, I put it on the PowerPoint. He said, if we want to make this great state of Pakistan happy and prosperous, we should wholly and solely concentrate on the well-being of the people, and especially of the masses and the poor. Jinnah encouraged the rise of a vigorous civil society, one in which ethnic and religious divides would be set aside so as to promote the overall well-being of the new country, prodding the new citizens that, and I quote him here, some of you could probably quote this by heart, if you work together in a spirit that every one of you, no matter to what community he belongs, no matter what relations he had with you in the past, no matter what is his color, creed, caste, or creed, is first, second, and last a citizen of this state with equal rights, privileges, and obligations, there will be no end to the progress you will make. You are free to go to your temples, you are free to go to your mosques, or to any other places of worship in this state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of the state. Jinnah regarded Pakistan as the culmination of what had finally become a mass-based grassroots movement that now included people from a range of ethnic, class, regional, and religious backgrounds, a cornucopia of groups that would be focused on the overall well-being of the state, regardless of their divisions. Jinnah and his supporters expected that differences would be resolved within a democratic process based on what he perceived was a shared conviction that they had achieved something pivotal for the Muslims of South Asia. The havoc, social disruptions, and overall chaos that followed in the wake of partition kindled a unifying spirit among many of the new Pakistanis. Alternative viewpoints, however, existed from the outset. Distinct groups initially wanted no part of Pakistan, but for different reasons. Supporters of the Punjab Unionist Party remained loyal to the British. Their descendants today still identify with global culture as they educate their children in British-style schools. They speak English among themselves. They travel and migrate abroad frequently and tend not to get involved with religious politics. In addition, many Pashtuns from the outset refused to accept the international boundary between Pakistan and Afghanistan as the Durand Line had been determined by the British, while most Baluch weren't sure what the new country held for them at all. The Jamaat-e-Islami, headed by Maulana Maududi, as well as heads of other distinct madrasas, particularly those run by conservative Deobandis in India, they initially rejected the demand for Pakistan on the grounds that Islam could not be limited by the borders of a nation state, on the argument that a Muslim's identity is first and foremost with the religion and therefore cannot be restricted by man-made boundaries. Many Indian Muslims, however, soon migrated after partition to Pakistan out of political and economic necessity. Once arriving there, many in these groups then focused on creating a Dar-ul-Islam, an abode of Islam for Muslims in Pakistan, despite Jinnah's August 11th message that I just read aloud to you. At the outset, lawmakers adopted the Government of India Act of 1935 as its working constitution, as consensus on a number of important concerns was difficult to achieve, especially the place that Islam should occupy in the governance structure of the new state. A year after independence, the state created the Muslim personal law of Shariat to recognize a woman's right to inherit property consistent with Sharia. In doing so, for the first time, it symbolically placed legal reforms in Pakistan within an Islamic discourse. This was the first act by the state to legislate what was perceived to come from religion into the civil legal code. Even more significantly, the Constituent Assembly promulgated the Objectives Resolution merely a year later, in 1949, suggesting a remarkably different stance on the role of religion and Islam in Pakistan from what we heard from Jinnah's vision. A Dawn newspaper editorial, I think, captures this shift well. It writes, "The opening sentence of the resolution confirms the limits for the state as prescribed by God, who has sovereignty over the entire universe. It declares that by his authority delegated to the state of Pakistan through its people, Muslims shall be enabled to order their lives in accordance with Islam." With this, Jinnah's view of that religion was of no concern for the state, but rather a country where Muslims could take refuge from domination by others, this was transformed into Pakistan becoming a country whose raison d'etre was to ensure its inhabitants could live as good Muslims. The state in Pakistan began actively to cement the identity of Pakistanis as Muslims in juxtaposition to the pronounced threat of India bent on destroying the new state, and they advocated the trope to support, again, Muslim brothers and sisters in Kashmir from Indian aggression. In effect, the state was seeking to unify the majority of its population on the basis of religious identity as Muslims to counter the external threat posed by India. But we must bear in mind that despite that 97% of the population of Pakistan are Muslims, they're divided into different groups. And as the years went by, divided by different levels of piety within those groups. And it became far too easy to proclaim difference on the basis of religious identity. Needless to say, non-Muslim minorities, Hindus, Christians, Zoroastrians, and a few others, they began to feel sidelined in Pakistan. Many left, but many, because of their own sentiments of nationalism for Pakistan, they decided to mobilize and struggle for their rights. And these struggles continue today. Not surprisingly, as I was saying, the heightened identification of the state with Islam led to riots questioning who was to be counted as a Muslim and who was not. Anti-Ahmadiyya protests led to riots insisting that they be declared as non-Muslims. They broke out in the Punjab provincial capital of Lahore in 1953. Martial law was at once imposed. The federal and the military cracked down and said, go away, basically. The federal government commissioned something called the Munir Report to inquire more deeply into the cause of these riots. Hamid Khan, author of the most comprehensive constitutional history of Pakistan to date, he notes that the Munir Report's observations of the role being played by politicized Islam then and the sectarian factionalism it fomented is foreboding when considering the state of the country 55 years later. This is when he was writing. And he writes, and this is very sobering to listen to, and I don't think that I put this on the slide. Maybe I did. It's not true. Okay. This is what's coming up. I didn't think I put this on the slide. He writes, from the interviews with leaders of various sects and schools of Islam, that they could not stand one another and called each other kafirs as well. According to the Barelvi ulama, Deobandis and Wahhabis were outside the pale of Islam. And according to a fatwa of the Deobandis, all Asna Ashari Shias were also kafirs. So the foundation was now set for violent religious extremism in Pakistan. Turning now to the second state action that many people attribute to the rise of religious extremism in Pakistan was the passage of the Second Amendment to Pakistan's third constitution in 1973, and that's the constitution that is still intact in Pakistan. The two prior constitutions had little impact on incorporating religion into the state, other than declaring the name to be the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The third constitution initially did little else aside from creating the Council of Islamic Ideology to ensure that no laws in the country were in contradiction to Islam. However, it was a year later that the new constitution had a notable impact on religious extremism with the passage of the Second Amendment in September of '74 that declared that Ahmadiyas were not Muslims, what the rioters had demanded back in 1953. Interesting, Saudi Arabia allows them to perform the Hajj, but for Pakistan, they're not Muslims. Since then, Ahmadiyas have often been spurned and excluded from full participation in Pakistani society. Most recently, this dynamic manifested in September 2018, just last month, when Prime Minister Imran Khan appointed Princeton-based economist Arif Mia to Pakistan's Economic Advisory Council. This was seen by many as a bold effort by the new government to appoint a highly qualified Ahmadiyya economist, but the government quickly rescinded that decision due to threats of countrywide protests by Islamist dissidents. So a third state action, which is on the PowerPoint, that contributed to religious extremism and intolerance in Pakistan, occurred on 2nd February 1979, the day then dictator Zia-ul-Haq promulgated his Islamization program. It fostered an unprecedented controversy as the state never initiated a public consensus on what Islamization should mean, nor what it should comprise, ultimately pitting Muslim religious communities against each other by generally adopting Wahhabi interpretations of Islam rather than the more liberal Hanafi ones historically more common in syncretic South Asia. The pluralistic perspective was now definitively discarded when the state left no question that some interpretations of Islam were to wield unprecedented influence. This soon melded in the popular imagination with the response of the Pakistan state to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December of 1979. This was a seemingly political act. The Soviet Union, which had long-standing ties with Afghanistan going back to the 1920s, was seeking to buttress its control after a series of political assassinations had introduced a great deal of instability there. With some roughly 30,000 troops sent to invade Afghanistan, Soviet troops killed President Hafizullah Amin and installed Babrak Karmal in his place. But it was the United States and Pakistan government's reaction to that event that infused religion into the scenario by deeming the Afghan opposition to be mujahideen, fighters waging a jihad, which is a religious act. The US put out a clarion call to Muslims worldwide to fight against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and Pakistan provided sites for training camps and the transit of arms, vehicles, and other supplies. In this endeavor, a group called the Base was formed in Peshawar to outfit the new recruits in this so-called jihad and provide them with food, housing, weapons, and instructions. Of course, you all know here in Arabic, the Base translates as Al-Qaeda. Framing the Afghan insurgency into a religious act fed into already burgeoning Salafi sentiments in Pakistan being nurtured by the Zia-ul-Haq government. The Pakistan government's focus had now shifted to Islamizing laws and policies internally while supporting the Mujahideen in what was now termed a religious struggle in Afghanistan. The new state-sanctioned emphasis on Orthodox Sunni Islam in Pakistan further aggravated historic ruptures between Sunnis with Shias, Christians, and Hindus. Laws were changed, including the blasphemy law, making the sentence far harsher, and textbooks and syllabi were altered, all to feed into the new ideology of the state under Zia-ul-Haq. A Pakistani writer, Hassan Jafar Zaidi, argues that this was a form of religious narcissism on the part of the state, culminating into its logical end, religious extremism, violence, and terrorism. Simultaneously, this was also fueled by the marked growth of madrasas due to change government policy that encouraged their growth and accepted their degrees as equivalent to secular ones. Of course, a watershed period when violent extremism began to manifest on a near daily basis, and attacks against religious minorities heightened, was when the government of Pakistan joined the US war against terrorism, supposedly war against terrorism, following the attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001. Heightened intolerance by a relatively small segment of Pakistanis against religious minorities, but increasingly not just non-Muslims, but even towards non-Salafi Sunni Muslims, exists within many communities today, to a level far greater than the Munir Commission had observed in the mid-1950s. A.H. Nair, a scholar of education in Pakistan, blames this on the increase in madrasa education, and that, he says, madrasas have not surprisingly become a source of hate-filled propaganda against other sects, and the sectarian divide has become sharper and more violent. It was madrasa students and faculty who actively supported the Afghan Taliban and Al-Qaeda, especially after the September 11th attacks, and they were the prominent founding members of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. I am skipping a little bit because I thought I would be faster. Zia-ul-Haq, in promulgating his Islamization program, had made a definitive statement that ideologically moved Pakistan closer to the Middle East than it had ever been before. The culture wars that have been fought within Pakistan on the basis of religious identity continue today. The better-known issues today include controversies over religious minorities' participation in general elections, controversies over the blasphemy laws, and how the entire country was brought to a standstill 1 year ago, November 2017, around the issue of Khatam al-Nubuwwat, the finality of the prophethood, when some slight wording was changed in the elections bill. Equally important manifestations can be seen in Sindh, where its traditions of interfaith harmony have been attacked by extremists, and where Baluchistan's more secular orientations have also been attacked by extremists, and how Pashtuns have become widely associated with religious extremism, although the majority defiantly dispute this. So we see violent extremism has manifested in myriad ways in Pakistan, and the number of violent acts of religious extremism has mushroomed in the past decade. In response, the Pakistan state and military have sought to counter this extremism through different strategies, although these have been fraught with problems. On the other hand, non-state actors, individuals along with NGOs, are engaging in various kinds of social negotiations and actions to lessen the violence and recapture indigenous syncretic cultural identity, often in what I believe to be very inventive ways. There's one point where everything changed. It was with the attack on the Army Public School in Peshawar, 16th December 2014. This was a pivotal moment in the public's consciousness about terrorism, when 132 children were killed in their school in a matter of moments. There was an overwhelming outcry that now something must be done. It seems that the violence escalated for a time after the APS attack, and the most terrorist attacks indeed occurred within Pakistan just last year in 2017. particularly in February, with major incidents occurring in Lahore, Salwan and Sindh, the shrine of Shahbaz Qalandar, and in Baluchistan. I think it's less useful to rehash the acts of violent extremism prompted by religious fervor in Pakistan, or the responses by the Pakistan army to counter them, in turn by violently acting against the areas where many of these perpetrators reside. Instead, I'd like to turn to look at a few of the inventive ways I just referred to. One exciting inventive way the Pakistanis are engaging in to lessen the political divides is being carried out by groups of religious leaders throughout the country. They have vowed for roughly a decade to do something about the violence occurring between communities. They've been mobilizing other religious leaders along these lines, and in particular often led by Muslim ulama, such as Imam Abdul Khabir Azad, who is the Imam of the Badshah Mosque in Lahore, but also partnered with Father James Chanan, a leader of the Christian community in Lahore. I've met with similar types of leaders in Peshawar, in Multan, and the like. So they've created new types of networks that have reached out to include other religious leaders as well in their groups. Christian and Hindu leaders are also playing important roles in promoting interfaith harmony. And these two men you see on the screen are very active in the Lahore-based Interfaith Council for Peace and Harmony. Imam Azad told me about what happened after the attack on the Christian community that's near the Badshah Mosque, the Joseph Colony. He said to me, I went there with my team of all sects. I went there with Shias, Badelvis, Deobandis, Ahle Hadith. I went there and said to the people, there were thousands of people who were very angry, and they wanted to do more destruction. I went there and told them, like you were going, Islam did not give you permission. I thought it was more dramatic when Khalid Massoud said to me that Imam Azad went to the Joseph Colony with his hands outstretched and said, stop in the name of Islam. But he said he didn't quite do it that dramatically. But energized by their success in quelling the violence and animosity, the group of interfaith leaders began to meet more regularly. When violence broke out and allegations of blasphemy in Kotrab and Krishan a couple of years later, all these leaders of different religious groups went there to quell the crowd. And indeed, they were able to accomplish that in the wake of the military not being able to do such things. Another way that we can see of people rising up and saying, stop, bus to the violence, is manifesting in music. For example, Taimoor Rahman and his Lal Band perform free concerts at schools and whatever public venues will let them perform, bringing an important message that Pakistan's future lies in the hands of its children and they can be actors promoting harmony, and that no one is going to do this for them, and that their future is up to them. Karim Khan's anthem for the Peshawar Zalmi cricket team earlier this year does not celebrate the sport. You wouldn't know it's about cricket. It doesn't celebrate competing or winning, but rather is an uplifting call for the youth of Peshawar to grasp their future with their hands and build something great. The Lauti Melo, organized each spring by the amazing Sindhi Sufi folk rock singer Sef Samejo, brings people together for 3 days in Hyderabad, Sindh, to talk peace and communal harmony during the day. What happened? No, but that was all. To talk peace and communal harmony during the day, and sing messages of peace, hope, and communal harmony late in the evenings. Attendees often remark they cannot believe this is occurring in Pakistan, but why not? A large majority of Pakistanis are aspiring to build a progressive, peaceful future. The first step is within Pakistan. The next step is having a voice with India and celebrating similarities and potentials, and then with the whole of South Asia. There are many other examples I can discuss about how local people are finding their voices and acting to counter violence within Pakistan, but time constraints prevent me from elaborating too much on them. I want to mention that I've been impressed by resistance poetry, especially in Pashto and Sindhi, that is saying this is not who we are. We are not these violent stereotypes, and now we have to move forward to stop the animosities. And one of the poets is here, Abdul Rahim Rohani. There are other initiatives happening in Pakistan today, such as activities to take back cultural spaces, occurring within such public forums as T2F, the second floor in Karachi, Khana Badosh in Hyderabad, Books and Beans and The Last Word in Lahore, Multan Tea House, and the like, that offer venues for people of any political persuasion to gather unimpeded and hold public talks. It's an unfettered opportunity to explore ideas. They also provide open venues for people to come together and just talk. A final initiative I'd like to point out here is that what people are taking has to do with public art that's appearing all over the country. Whether in Karachi, where the Rang de Karachi initiative was spearheaded by a group of art students who were just fed up with the violence plaguing the city, or in Bahawalpur in southern Punjab, where university... Yeah, or in Bahawalpur in southern Punjab, where university students began a similar campaign with paintings promoting peace and harmony. And after about 5 years, they're still unvandalized. But I'll return to these initiatives in a few minutes as perhaps laying precedents for promoting peace in the region. So what can we say about prospects for peace in South Asia to overcome religious extremism? Throughout the region today, the fear of terrorism is formidable. However, in part because of this, the same things that we see are starting to happen in Pakistan will invariably spread to the whole of the subcontinent. People are better educated, more connected through mainstream and social media, and becoming fed up with the violence. As I mentioned at the outset, Pakistan is a key player in the region and holds the potential to play either an enormously provocative or immensely peaceful role in South Asia. The violence that Pakistan has been experiencing has prevented it from reaching out effectively to other states in the region. How can you speak about peace with others when your own house is not in order? But given the initiatives I've just discussed that are underway in Pakistan today, and the reality that the violence is indeed lessening, I'm hopeful that Pakistanis, not just the state, but especially its citizenry, will be able to focus on improving relations within the region. Each country in the region is facing its own internal challenges of religious extremism. Bangladesh has suffered violence between Muslim groups, notably between those practicing the more syncretic traditional Islam versus those now embracing the Wahhabi-influenced Salafi practice of a rigid Islam previously unknown in the area. Sri Lanka went through a devastating civil war a generation ago between Buddhist Sinhalese and Hindu Tamils. The rebuilding is ongoing. This occurred in the land of the Lankachalaka temple in the heart of the country that has an entrance for Buddhists and an entrance for Hindus, yet inside the two communities share the space. This is what the inhabitants of the area had always valued about the religious and cultural practices, which were nearly decimated because of economic and political strife. India's own internal peace has been rattled since its founding by disputes between religious groups that frequently manifest as political conflicts. I won't talk about the violent acts. I think everybody in this room is aware of many of them. But at the time of the destruction of the Babri Masjid in December 1992, I was in Lahore. I saw Pakistanis at the Jain Mandir. I saw some people actively ripping apart the Jain Mandir because a social contract had been broken. And so what we find now is that whereas once they were very careful to take care of Hindu temples, because they told me that Hindus are taking care of their mosques, That was broken because, but now I saw the same people react with raw passion when the social contract was broken with the destruction of the Babri Mosque. So Hindu-Muslim conflict and animosity appears higher than ever in today's India. Hindu piety also seems to be at its height as the state champions the concept of Hindu supremacism in the country. As Jinnah did not envision Pakistan as an Islamic state, where Islam would be elevated over religions, so too neither Gandhi nor Nehru, and certainly not Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, the Muslim Congress leader who chose to remain in India after independence, they did not envision India as a country where Hinduism would be elevated over all other religions. So some concluding thoughts. Lived social realities exist today in South Asia, somewhere between the different layers of religious extremism and violence on the one hand, and ideals of tolerance and peace on the other. It is in recapturing South Asia's syncretic identity that holds the greatest promise to bring people together and foment unity and shared values in the subcontinent. And who will do this? I can't anticipate that this will be an initiative fostered by any state. We have seen that states have much to gain by pitting their populations against the other. Recently, at the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly session in New York, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi refused to allow his External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj to hold a scheduled meeting on the sidelines of the MOOC with Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who later offered that peace talks are just not a priority for India. This was captured and transmitted on media worldwide, contributing to people's frustrations with their leaders. The internet provides for symbolic walls, and people are communicating with one another through them. People's diplomacy has been powerful in the past. We've seen examples of peace caravans and of journalists crossing between India and Pakistan, and the Lahore-based Ajoka Theatre Company performing plays in India, promoting communal harmony. And as those kinds of initiatives are achieving a measure of success in Pakistan, the one country where critics never expected to see it, these same kinds of initiatives hopefully will expand in the subcontinent. As regular people become fed up, the hope truly lies with them. They will seek to comfort victims of violence and vow that they will no longer perpetuate it. They will write resistance poetry, disdaining the nationalistic fighting. They will continue the musical and theatrical exchanges that have begun between countries in the subcontinent, and they are the ones, as happening in Pakistan today, who will take a stand and tell their governments to stop the encouragement of this militarism. I'd like to offer a final comment here, in light of the name of this conference. People in South Asia have long looked to the United States as a possible mediator of their conflicts. As an American, I can authoritatively and very sadly say that era is over. Under this current president, the U.S. will no longer come to the assistance of any of these countries. As more people come to understand this, that too will provide fuel to people's diplomacy. It's really all that's left, if there's any hope, for a peaceful, prosperous future in the subcontinent. Thank you.
How about if you just stand here and you can keep answering? I think I'm happy taking this along around, but it keeps on switching on. So be prepared for that.
But like yesterday, I can speak loud. I'm a professor. Oh, that's right. I have to say.
Hello.
Yeah. Like that.
Right. What a marvellous overview of what I would call the Pakistan question. You started by raising the issue of Pakistan's Islamic identity and the cultural
Just talk loud.
and the cultural wars that are revolving around it. I'm just wondering if the chance to make Islam the foundation of Pakistan was lost in 1954. Draft 3 of the first constitution was agreed to by everyone, including the Islamic parties. What a nuisance. Sorry.
Maybe you should just...
With that failure, that left the army as the foundation, rather than Islam, of Pakistan. This morning, Feki Mansouri talked about Tunisia as a relative success story compared with other Middle Eastern countries. And one of the factors that he identified was that the army was apolitical. The Pakistani army is anything but apolitical. It is a state within a state. A recent book on the army calls Pakistan the garrison state. Now, do you think that something has to be done about the army first and its role in politics to ensure the reconciliation that you referred to at the end?
I was going to take a few questions, but I have a brief answer to this, actually. The army has its own reaction to violence and extremism. It had, and somebody here, I don't see her right now, is looking at the terrorism courts and how they're operating, and how very often these terrorism courts do not try true terrorists. I mean, it's just another way of being able to sentence somebody to death. But you can't say that, I mean, what the army is doing is over there. They have their, what is it now? We're up to 12 different Arabic language endeavors in Pakistan to rout out the extremists, but this is their priority. And for example, the army's activities in Baluchistan. Some people say that they're routing out extremists, others saying they're killing freedom fighters. So, an extremist in one vision is somebody else's freedom fighter. The army's going to be there no matter what, but how can people themselves get past this violence and extremism is what I've been looking at. And I think we're seeing so many wonderful examples of that. And I think too, if there's going to be one actor in Pakistan that will be against extending the olive branch to India. Now I shouldn't say this because if people from the army were here, they would disagree. But historically, the army has not been so in favor of extending the olive branch to India. Reza Khan was disappeared last year because and Ghazi Dosti was advocating for communication with India, but people are doing it regardless of the army. Other questions, comments?
If you can raise your hand.
Yeah, I think I'd like to take about 3 or 4 questions and then I can answer them in a group.
There's one here.
Okay, right, the person who's working on the anti-terrorism courts.
Yeah, okay, so I have a few small questions. So one, you mentioned Orthodox Islam and Salafism. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether they are the same thing or they have some differences in terms specifically in Pakistan as well. Secondly, I'm wondering, you haven't mentioned, the U.S. role in the entire process of the sort of radicalization in Pakistan becoming, and the sort of outbreak of terrorism. So what do you think, how important that was? And thirdly, when you're talking about sort of resistance, the kinds of resistance movements that you're talking about, so I mean, being from Lahore and being essentially part of the left and sort of these liberal spaces in Pakistan, I feel that they're very, the way they are right now, they're very, very elite spaces. So I'm also, if you could just comment on the sort of class spaces and how much the kinds of economic policies that have happened over the years in terms of neoliberal policies, etc., do you think they have something to do with the kinds of violence that ends up happening? Because how does this become the only sort of way to express for people, because there is no other sort of alternatives?
I can answer some of that after we take some more questions, but are you kidding? You want me to answer all of that now on economic policy? Anyhow, I saw some questions on this side. Yes, back there? Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll let you pick them.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And you can't see him right there.
I do
Oh, okay.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
And I'm very polite, very humble, very quiet, but when I become really terrorizing chair, I am a terrorizing chair. Keep your questions short. And the answers too.
No, my answers are short.
Obviously, South Asia is famous for having history of these kind of localized interfaith peace-building initiatives. I'm curious, given such a long history, why you think this represents something new, or it does represent something new, and if so, why you're more optimistic now, and why the previous ones may or may not have failed.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Very short. You mentioned people doing what they want regardless of the army. So it's something like very separate, these two things. People from army from people, and they are in one country, so it's difficult. So my question is that, for example, Pakistani army, they playing with this game with this extremist groups in Kashmir and Afghanistan since the Cold War time, the 1990s. So what is the result of this, the impacts of this interaction between army and these madrasas and radical groups? So it's difficult to separate them and then go on people doing what they want regardless of the army. It's difficult to put things in that context.
Okay. You both asked, I could lecture for an hour about both answers.
And these 4 questions would be easy because
Yeah, right. No, I'm keeping notes. That's why I bet.
Thank you, Mark. My question is to some extent long. The first one, you
You're
told
not
that
allowed. She's not.
you told that the British first recorded religious extremism in the 1860s, and definitely was, they defeated the
The
jihadi
first
networks.
laws, I said the first laws they passed.
Yeah.
And not the first acknowledgement of it, but the first time they actually passed a law.
Even there was a first acknowledgement also because they defeated the jihadist network in 1866 at the Balakot battle.
Right.
And my question is that time, that jihadi extremism started at basically the British territorial area by the Berelvi's followers, that means Shah Aziz, who introduced the term of Darul Harb. And British then mitigated that was able to split that group into 2 groups, that between Darul Harb and Darul Aman, they introduced the term that no Indian subcontinent can be the Darul Aman. So my question to you, the concept of Darul Harb in 1860s and the concept of jihad, today's jihad, that we oriented in 1990s, is there any similarities or dissimilarities?
Okay, and the last one?
I'll keep it very short and direct. Al-Ahmadiyya relationship with the Pakistan state and the civil society. What's your comment on that? What have you seen? Because you said there are initiatives to, create harmony and talks between interfaith leaders. So where does the Ahmadiyya sect falls in this relationship and this initiatives to create harmony?
Okay, that's a really good question. First of all, I'd like to commend you all. I am a professor, asking good questions, most of which can really not possibly be answered in this brief period of time. I'm going to jump over the question of defining Orthodox Islam, Salafism, and also the U.S. role in the process of terrorism. I'm not looking at how the terrorism was started. I mean, Salim Shahzad gave his life for trying to uncover that. And many others are just elaborating. There are things we can never know. And the U.S. role in the process, the only thing that I talked about was how the United States government and the government of Pakistan, 1979, started to inject religion into all of this by calling the Afghans Mujahideen. They were, they put a religious context in it. They didn't have to do that. But other than that, I'm really looking at solutions and how people are trying to come up with solutions. I completely disagree that these are elite spaces. I have met enough people who are definitely not elites, who are deeply involved in many different things, and I just mentioned one, Reza Khan, who's from a lower middle class background. Reza was disappeared in December, and he just reappeared in July. And in fact, he's trying to raise money so he can leave Pakistan. If anybody's interested in helping him out, I can tell you how to do that. But I've met people all over the interior of Sindh. I mean, these are not the ones who go up and talk at fancy things. These are just regular people. And so many of the poets I've met, especially, I mean, Pashto resistance poets and Sindhi resistance poets, these are just regular people. No one could call Hafiz Nizamani, this amazing Sindhi poet, an elite. Read my book when I finish it, and then you'll find out more about him, hopefully. But why now? Why am I excited about these these initiatives today? It's because every single place, everywhere you go, people are connected. People have cell phones. I mean, the poorest people I know come up to me, are you on Facebook? And I'm not, so. But, you know, people are connected by Facebook, they're connected by cell phones, they know the news that's happening, and also the threats are greatest. And people have been seeing the manifestation of this violence for so long that this is quite formidable. So there is a different dynamic happening today. And there have been a lot of people-to-people engagements to promote peace between different countries of South Asia, especially between India and Pakistan. And I think when we see these changes happening in Pakistan today, it gives us hope that they could happen in the whole of the subcontinent. Relationship between army and radical groups, I really can't go into in this brief amount of time I had, but the point that I'm trying to make is the army is doing its thing, but that's not finally for the first time, it's not preventing regular people from doing their things as well. And this we have not seen very much. We've seen occasionally, we really haven't seen as much as we're seeing today in Pakistan's history. Talking about Dar al-Harb and Jihad, we will talk later in private because I think we would confuse 95%, you know, a lot of people here who don't know the history behind that. So I think I answered all the questions. No, I had that and I wanted to, that one I want to answer. We know that Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has in many, I use the expression, he panders to the Islamists, and he has for some time. I understand that in 2014, Atif Mia had offered to come to Pakistan to be with Imran Khan at the Darna, so Imran Khan could actually talk about economic policies, and Imran Khan said to him, "You're an Ahmadiyya, better not come." But now after he became Prime Minister and people were so hopeful about Pakistan, the fact that he invited Atif Mia, the Ahmadiyya, Princeton economist, you want to put your economy together, put together the best team, right? So he comes to Pakistan voluntarily to be on this economic council, and then the Barelvis and the Khatam al-Nabuwat, and they're starting to, you know, get very upset. And so Imran Khan does an about turn, and he says thanks but no thanks. To the credit of many, 2 other people who are on that Economic Advisory Council resigned, amidst a great deal of publicity, and making a lot of people in the country think, why are we not having this Pakistani? Okay, he's Ahmadiyya, but whoever said Khatam al-Nabuwat has anything to do with economic policy? I think that there's gradually a greater appreciation of, wait a minute, maybe we need to revisit this. Not completely, not entirely, not as much as people like me wish that there was, but at least it's entering the discourse. Those people who were not Ahmadiyyas did resign, and they were also eminent economists. One was from Harvard, and the other one I think was from Britain's. I might remember, he's younger than me. But the thing is, it is a problem. And now that Khadim Hussein Rizvi has really been holding the country at bay over the Khatam al-Nabuwat issue, that it's like this was happening at the same time that Imran Khan was asking overseas Pakistanis to contribute money to building a dam. And so you see all these commentaries in both the Urdu and the English press saying, does this mean that overseas Ahmadiyas can contribute to the dam, or their money's not desired? But of course, there was no official answer. Thank you.
Well, it shows that if you get tough, people listen to you. So I'm so glad that all of you kept it in time. But I'm sure everybody would agree that Professor Anita Weiss actually showed us that how state structures can alter their nature, and when the state becomes more religiously oriented and promotes extremism in one way or another, it's not the end of the story, because you could still have grassroots activism that can at least try and change the picture. And I guess in that she's provided us with a model that's applicable not just simply to Pakistan, but also to the largest secular state, India, in the region and other smaller states, that as the state promotes religious identity or intolerance, depending upon where they are, they can actually set in motion processes that go beyond their control, and they can have an impact on the society, but also in the region. But that it still doesn't end the individual or civil society groups' activism to change it for better. So I think in that sense, Anita, thank you very much. What I'd like to call upon everyone to show your appreciation for the speaker and others who kept to my orders and kept their questions to a limit, but also a wonderful audience. Please.